Hello there everyone, and welcome to this program about the Q400. We're going to start moving away from the major systems now, as we've discussed those in some detail, and hope you've enjoyed those videos and found them useful. And we're now going to move on to more procedural and technique videos, and I think the best place to start off is for you to follow me on a scheduled service, flight BE501 from Birmingham to Jersey. Scheduled flight time is 1 hour and 10 minutes. And we're going to be using aircraft Golf Echo Charlie Oscar Hotel, and I'm going to take you from the very start to the very end, giving you a good idea of all the various flight phases and how the various procedures are carried out throughout the flight. So, as you know, we can't just jump in the aeroplane and go. We have a few preparations to complete first of all. So why don't you join me in the dispatch office now, so to speak, and we'll have a look at some of those preparations before we head out to the aircraft. So you join me now in the virtual dispatch office, for want of a better phrase. You can see that I'm going to be using SimBrief to dispatch the aircraft today. As you know, in real life we wouldn't be doing this as pilots. We just turn up to the airport and print all the paperwork out, but in the sim we're not just pilots, we're engineers and dispatchers as well. So I thought that to maximise the general experience of this tutorial video, I'd give you a decent idea of how to realistically prepare for the simulator flight. I'm using SimBrief. You can also use the Aerosoft utility PFPX, which is payware of course, but I do thoroughly recommend it. I have a copy of it and it's a superb piece of software. But I'm using SimBrief partly because of ease of use for demonstration purposes on the video, and also because it is a generally excellent feature and something that I thoroughly recommend. It's also free of charge, so those of you who don't wish to pay for the payware PFPX get a free account with SimBrief. And the only thing you may have to pay for is the navigation cycle update, which is provided by Navigraph for a fairly small annual fee. And again, I'd recommend that as well because it provides you with up-to-date navigation information, not just for SimBrief or PFPX, but for all of your add-on aircraft as well. And I do think SimBrief is a real testament to the level of dedication that we have in the flight sim community, that such an excellent service could be provided free of charge. So I do generally really recommend SimBrief, and if you're not using PFPX, then do get yourself a free account. Anyway, let's start preparing for the flight, shall we? You can see I've already populated quite a lot of the fields for our flight today, and I'm sure many of you know how to use SimBrief, but just for those of you who are perhaps not too familiar with the pre-flight preparation stage, I just thought I'd go through the various features of the dispatch options with you, so you know what to fill in and what all the information means. So let's start first of all with the flight information. The airline code is the ICAO code for Flybe Bravo Echo Echo. The flight number is 501. We're departing from the ICAO code Echo Golf Bravo Bravo, which is Birmingham, and arriving at Echo Golf Juliet Juliet, which is Jersey. You'll notice when you fill in the arrival field in the SimBrief dispatch options that it will provide you automatically with an alternate, and this is usually, I've found, I'm not criticising SimBrief, it's a very clever feature that automatically generates an alternate, but I have found that the alternates are usually a little bit outlandish. For example, when I typed Echo Golf Juliet Juliet, it gave me an alternate of Manchester, which for those of you who are familiar with British geography will realise that Manchester is quite some way from Jersey, and I thought therefore that Guernsey would be a much better alternate. It's closer. The weather there, it's not great at the moment. Visibility 5 kilometres, mist, broken cloud at 500 feet, but it is still well within limits, and so we should be able to get into Guernsey no problem at all, and therefore we can use it as a suitable alternate. We have the correct date and the departure time, 12 o'clock Zulu time. This isn't the actual departure time of the real life BE501 flight, but for demonstration purposes we're going to be using 12 o'clock as our departure time. For the paperwork selections field, I've selected the LIDA, which is the Lufthansa Systems flight plan layout. Flybe does have its own layout, but it's not yet uploaded to SimBrief, so we'll use the Lido layout for now. We're using kilograms in Europe, of course. The next field is the contingency fuel. In fueling terms, we have a so-called trip fuel figure, and this is calculated to take us literally from the departure airfield to the destination airfield, so is therefore the bare minimum fuel requirement. The contingency fuel figure adds a little bit of a buffer onto that. So in the event that we encounter some operational change that will increase our fuel burn, perhaps air traffic control give us a longer routing, or they give us a lower flight level for crews than we originally anticipated, or perhaps we have slightly longer at the holding point at Birmingham than we were anticipating. To make sure that we don't eat too much into our trip fuel figure, we have this contingency fuel option, which just adds, as I say, a little bit of a buffer to stop us from depleting our fuel too excessively. So this is a standard figure of 5%, and that means 5% of the total trip fuel figure. And the next we have the reserve fuel, which is standard in the Q400 for virtual Flybe users anyway, 400 kilograms. This means that we never land, even in an emergency situation, with less than 400 kilograms of fuel on board, and this is just to make sure, obviously, that we don't get anywhere near to depleting the total fuel, even in an emergency situation or diversion situation. Next we want the detailed nav log, the step climbs, and the NOTAMs have all been selected as well. We can have the runway analysis as well if you'd like. The ETOPS planning isn't required. As many of you will know, ETOPS is short for Extended Range Twin Operating Procedures, and is used for long-haul aircraft primarily flying across the Atlantic, large expanses of water or sparse, remotely populated areas of land, and is not relevant for the flight from Birmingham to Jersey. So we'll keep that unticked. Flight maps will have it detailed, and you can also check the AIRAC, which is the navigation cycle, to make sure it's up to date, which you can see mine is. That's the year here, 15. And the month, which is December, so we're all up to date in that regard. The aircraft, obviously really important to make sure you've got the correct aircraft selected, so we're using the Q400, which is the Dash 8 Delta, the 402 series. The climb profile, we're using the Type 1 climb, which uses 900 RPM and climbs out at 210 knots, and that turns to 5 degrees pitch angle after flight level 150. We have the long-range cruise profile, and a descent profile using the Type 1 850 RPM profile, which is standard. The fuel factor will leave at 0, and the registration of the aircraft is Golf Echo Charlie Oscar Hotel. We don't have a FIN number as such, and we don't have cell call fitted to the aircraft. Cell call, again, mainly for long-haul aircraft flying across the Atlantic and so on, and using high-frequency radio communications. And finally we have the air traffic control call sign, which, as with most Flybe flights, is different to the scheduled flight number. You can find this by typing the scheduled flight number into Flight Radar, which is a really interesting service. So all you have to do is type the scheduled flight number and Flight Radar into Google, and you can then select the option in Flight Radar that will give you the call sign for today's flight. And I've found that the call sign for our flight today to Jersey is Jersey Niner to Victor. The next fields, as you can see, are automatically calculated. It says a time en route of 1 hour 20. We're scheduled at 1 hour 10, but that shouldn't be too bad. We'll leave it at 1 hour 20. The departure runway is 15, and we can see from the METAR at the moment that the winds are 180 degrees at 9 knots, so we can expect 15 for departure. And we can also expect runway 08 for arrival. Winds at Jersey 120 degrees 17 knots currently. so we can expect 08 for our arrival. Taxi out and taxi in, I've selected 8 minutes on each. That gives us the default fuel figure of around 70 kilos thereabouts, which is the standard taxi fuel figure in the real aircraft. Extra fuel, now it is of course at your discretion to carry extra fuel if required. Obviously the more fuel we take, the more money it costs the company, and also the heavier the aircraft is, and therefore the more fuel it burns, strangely enough. So you do have to compromise a little bit. We want to try and keep the extra fuel figure down to a minimum if possible. Obviously if you find that the NOTAMs or the weather would require a little bit of extra fuel, perhaps if you're expecting some holding at your arrival airfield, or if you think that you might require fairly long distance diversion, then extra fuel can be taken, again just to add a little bit of a buffer to make sure that you don't come anywhere near to depleting the overall fuel figure. But because the weather at Jersey is pretty good really, we have visibility greater than 10 kilometers, fairly windy but still well within limits, a few clouds at 500 feet, so weather isn't absolutely perfect. It's not a beautiful summer's day, but it is still well within limits, and we're not expecting to divert or encounter any major difficulties, so I'm electing not to take any extra fuel for today's flight. Next we look at the passenger figure. We're expecting a total of 50 passengers for today's flight. We're expecting to take a total of 800 kilograms of baggage, and if we feed those figures into the Majestic control panel in the weight and balance section, you can see we've put 800 kilograms of baggage into the aft baggage compartment. We don't usually carry baggage in the forward baggage compartment, which is just a very small little compartment at the front of the fuselage. We're carrying total of 50 passengers. We have a dry operating mass of 17898 kilograms, dry operating index of 94.6, and that's the standard dry operating mass for the Virtual Flybe Q400. And you can see if I press calculate, we're not going to have a look at the fuel at the moment. We'll have a look at that a little bit later on once we've finished the flight plan preparation. But if I press calculate, you can see that we have a zero fuel mass of 22.9. So I'm going to fill that into the zero fuel weight option, 22.9. The next thing we have to consider is the routing. Now again, SimBrief will populate this field for you, but it may not always be the most realistic routing. This document, which is provided by NATS and can be found very easily on Google just by typing in standard route document, gives you a comprehensive list of all the various UK routes. So our routing from Birmingham to Jersey today should be fairly straightforward to find. So here you can see I've selected the section that has Birmingham as the departure airfield and Jersey that has the arrival airfield, and you see we have a selection of routings available to us. The notes will give us a good idea of which ones are most suitable. Having read the various notes, I would say that the routings via Compton are possibly the most suitable for our particular route today. We have a service ceiling altitude of flight level 250 in the Q400, so you can see that the cruising range available for this particular routing is perfectly acceptable. The departure routing is going to take us via Compton, so that's the standard instrument departure. And the routing is going to take us from Compton via the Yankee 321 airway to Pepys, then the Quebec 41 airway to Southampton VOR, and then the November 621 airway to Lelna, where we start the Jersey 1 Whiskey arrival into Jersey Airport. So I think that's the most appropriate routing. I've read all the notes, and the notes aren't actually applicable to our flight, so there's no reason to preclude selection of this routing for our flight today. So that's what we're going to do. I'm going to copy this into SimBrief and see what it gives us. So I've now copied the routing into the route section of SimBrief, and for ease of use I've also inserted the standard instrument departure that we're going to expect and the standard arrival routing we're going to expect as well. I found these both from the UKAIP website just by going into the NATS UKAIP section for Birmingham Airport and having a look at the departures available. So I can see the Compton 1 Lima departure to Compton is available from runway 15, and the arrival routing is the Jersey 1 Whiskey onto runway 08 at Jersey. I then select Analyze Route, and as you can see it says the route is valid for the air data cycle that we have, and it gives us our route distance. We also have a nice map here with the various waypoints of the routing, and I suggest you look at that just to make sure that we have a fairly accurate flight plan route, no major anomalies. We're definitely going from Birmingham to Jersey, we're not going to California or anything like that, and all the waypoints seem sensible as well. So once all those sections are complete, we can then generate the operational flight plan, which takes a few seconds to complete, and then we have a really detailed and realistic document to work with. So now that the flight plan has been completed, we get the chance to have a look at the summary to review all the information, make sure it's correct before we have a look at it. So we have the correct airline and flight number, aircraft type, the airport information is all correct. We have a cruise flight level of 220, which is sensible. Correct date and departure time. An air time, it's looking like 58 minutes we're going to be in the air. And a block fuel of 1764 kilograms, which is also pretty sensible. We're not taking any extra fuel today as we've discussed, and we have a zero fuel weight, 22.9. Fuel factor remains at 0. We also get a chance to review the routing. No special remarks. And also check the various operational flight plan layout details to make sure they're all correct as well. Another quick check of the routing on the map just to make sure it's all looking fairly accurate, and we can then click View and Print PDF, and we have a copy of the document there for us to look at and verify. So once we've got a copy of the document, we can review all the various information. I may have a detailed look at the various sections of the flight plan in a different video, but for now I'm just going to have a look at the fuel section initially. So you have the trip fuel here, which takes us from Birmingham to Jersey. You can see that's 991 kilograms, which gives us 58 minutes flight time, and a contingency of 5%, which equates to 50 kilograms. Isn't very much, and as you can see it only gives us an extra 3 minutes, but we're not expecting any major operational changes to the flight that would increase our fuel consumption, so no more is required. We have the alternate fuel, which takes us from Jersey to Guernsey, which is 230 kilos, and a final reserve of 420 kilos. As I said, we need a minimum of 400, so this is a perfectly sensible figure, and that gives us a minimum fuel figure of 30 minutes flying time, so we will always have at least 30 minutes flying time on board the aircraft in any given situation. We're not taking any extra fuel, as we've discussed, and we have the taxi fuel here of 73 kilograms, which, as we said, is a realistic fuel figure for the Q400, and we're not expecting a particularly long taxi out at Birmingham. And as you can see, that gives us a total block fuel of 1764 kilograms and an estimated zero fuel weight of 22.9. So if we feed the information into the Q400 control panel in the weight and balance section, just to make sure we have all the correct details, we're taking a total of 50 passengers with 800 kilos of baggage in the aft baggage compartment, dry operating mass of 17898. That gives us a zero fuel weight of 22.9, slightly more, 38 kilograms above, which is perfectly acceptable, and a trip fuel is going to be 991 kilograms, and the total block fuel of 1764, which I think just for ease of use we can round up to 1770 kilograms. And if we press calculate, that gives us the correct load information, the zero fuel mass and the MAC, all of which we will have a little look at later on when we're setting the flight management system. The next thing to do, obviously very important, to check the weather. So we have a look at the METAR for Birmingham first of all. You can see it was generated at 1120 Zulu on the 7th of December, which is correct. The wind 170 degrees 8 knots, so we can expect runway 15 as we were anticipating. Visibility currently greater than 10 kilometers, represented by the 4 nines, so the visibility is perfectly acceptable. With few clouds at 1,700 feet and broken cloud at 3,100 feet, so it's quite a cloudy day, but again nothing would adversely affect our operation today. Temperature 14 degrees Celsius, so quite a warm day actually in Birmingham, not too bad. Dew point 11 degrees, and the QNH, which is the barometric setting for the altimeter of course, 1022. If we also have a look at the forecast weather conditions, we could see that between 0800 Zulu and 0600 Zulu tomorrow, the wind is likely to be southerly at 12 knots, visibility greater than 10, scattered cloud at 1500 feet, and that has a probability 30. Probability is usually expressed either as 30 or 40%. 40% of course meaning very likely, 30% not quite so likely. So between 8 and 10 we could expect 8 kilometers visibility, light drizzle and broken cloud at 800 feet. Fortunately we're departing a little bit later than that. You can see the drizzle is expected to stop during our period of flight. So between 10 o'clock and 8 o'clock Zulu we can then expect simple broken cloud figure of 1200 feet, so no rain or drizzle. The visibility is presumably back up to 10 kilometers. If we have a look at Jersey now, the current weather shows 130 degrees 16 knots, so it's quite windy, and we can expect therefore runway 08. We always land into wind if we can help it, of course. A few clouds at 500 feet, which is quite low. Visibility greater than 10 kilometers though, so that's well within limits. Temperature 11 degrees, the dew point at 10 degrees, and the QNH of 1024, with no significant changes expected. As you can see from the forecast, we are temporarily between 0600 and 1300, expecting a reduction in visibility with BR, which is an abbreviation that denotes mist, presumably from the French brouillard. As you can see though, the current visibility is greater than 10 kilometers, so hopefully we can say that reduced visibility due to the mist has now passed and has burnt off. Broken cloud at 500 feet, and that has a probability of 30%. And you could see also temporarily expected broken cloud at 200 feet. So the forecast, we could say, is not absolutely brilliant, but it is within limits. The visibility remains in limits even with the 3 kilometers mist, so we can expect no major problems going into Jersey. And the weather, as you can see, for Guernsey is very similar, as you'd expect. Jersey and Guernsey very close together and are famously very prone to similar weather conditions. So the weather's looking fairly favourable for Jersey and Guernsey. It's not perfect, but doesn't require any extra fuel, I don't think, and we're not expecting any major problems going in there. So that's the pre-flight preparation virtually sorted. The last thing that we have to do is file the flights on VATSIM. That is, of course, if you are intending to fly online, which I am going to do. I do like flying online wherever possible. So I'm going to select the VATSIM pre-file option. And again, we're just checking to make sure that all the various details are correct. SimBrief, just like PFPX, will automatically populate these various fields for you, and all you have to do is check the information is correct, so the correct call sign, the flight type, we're IFR of course, the true airspeed, departure Birmingham, the proposed departure time and our cruising altitude, the routing, destination, the time en route, which was 58 minutes if you remember, voice capabilities. I'm going to select text only today because for filming purposes I don't want to be using voice on the radio, but if you do have a headset and you can replicate real life operations, then I recommend you use full voice if you're willing to have a go. The remarks section, again, just making sure that these are relatively accurate. You don't want too many remarks in the operations section, but just all the valid information that you'd find on a real life flight plan. The total fuel on board, the alternate, which is Guernsey, and finally your name, your home base, and also your VATSIM ID and the password as well. Once all that's complete, you can then file the flight plan. It will be retained for 2 hours, and you can then, when you connect to VATSIM, automatically bring up your flight plan, so you don't have to manually fill in all the various flight plan fields. It just saves time, makes things a little bit easier. So that's it. That's the pre-flight complete. Let's head out to the airplane, shall we?